I had a suggestion today that I talk about the nature of time. It's a very kind of obscure concept with a lot of implications. The discussion or any mention of time in the suttas is mostly in terms of the three times past, present, and future. In Tibetan text, there's in the 6 yogas of Naropa, one of the yogas is the yoga of the three times. And it's to experience that the past is unreal because it has already ceased to exist. The future is unreal because it is not fixed. And the present is unreal because as soon as you look at it, it's gone. It's already past. That's an infinitesimal vanishing point. This is also close to the idea of experience as momentary dhammas, and as expressed by the 20th century Buddhist scholar Sherbatsky, he calls a Dhamma a point instant, which I've always liked that phrase. So infinitesimal, it's a mathematical concept in calculus is of the infinitesimal. It's like a unit so small it's arbitrarily small. In the physical dimension, a point, a mathematical point is a location but without any dimension. It has neither length nor breadth, it's just a location. So an infinitesimal unit of time has a location in time but has no duration. So a Dhamma is, by Sherbatsky's translation, is a point instant. So it's the experience taken to an infinitesimal. We have been doing Tanisaro's book in the book study on mindfulness and kamma. And these concepts, particularly in the aspects he emphasizes, both of these concepts have an important time element to them. Kamma is an action done in the present, but it has results in the future. And mindfulness, related to memory, is recollectedness in the sense of remembering to be present. So your mind is in the present moment, but you situate that within the continuity. You know where you are and what you're doing, so you're not confused. Now, it's said, for example, of the Bodhisattva and some other rare instances that when they're born, they descend into the womb mindfully, which means they retain memory of their past lives. They're aware of the continuity. Continuity is not broken. Our experience of time is this one moment at a time. And whether time has any external intrinsic reality is debatable. In modern physics, the arrow of time is one of the issues or problems of why do things go only forward in time when the equations generally all work out with the time element forward or backward. And the usual explanation is that because the universe started at a situation of very low entropy, and entropy has been increasing ever since. That's the gradient of time. Entropy being the opposite of orderliness. It's like Ajahn Chah said when he was asked about impermanence. He held up his drinking cup and he said, "This cup is broken." Any glass or cup or dish is eventually going to be broken shards. And you can't imagine the shards reassembling to make a new cup. A cup falls off the counter, it breaks. But shards don't spontaneously reassemble and make a cup. Well, things don't move towards greater order in the universe. It's the running down. It's like, think of the universe as like a wind-up toy. The spring at the beginning, the spring is completely wound up tight, and it's slowly unwinding. and does all these tricks and moves all these mechanical parts, but the driving spring is losing energy all the time. So in the physical universe, there's this constant running downhill. This is the arrow of time. And with our consciousness, we experience time in this way, one moment succeeding another in order, from past to future. And we're always, at any time, situated in the present. And it's only this vanishing, impossibly small moment that is actually, essentially, phenomenologically real. It's only at this moment that we have. This moment is shaped by multiple past causes, including all our past karma and all the various other physical causes. And this moment is the seed for what unfolds in the future. There was in ancient times within Buddhism and all the different schools, the early schools of Buddhism, one of the debated topics was the nature of time. The Sarvastivada school, which is a very large school, was the dominant school in northern India for many centuries. The name means all exists, because one of their doctrines was that all exists, past, present, and future. All three times are all equally real, equally existent. In Katawatu, the Book of Debates, this is criticized by the Theravadan interpreters, stating the position that only the present moment is actually real. Now, these are obscure kind of metaphysical debates. When we look at the Buddhist teachings as a whole, his emphasis is always on the practicality of things, of actual human experience. The actual sort of metaphysical nature of time or broader reality is not something he was interested in discussing, no matter how much it fascinated later generations of Buddhists to argue these minutiae. The Buddha himself, he did not go into that. And it's pretty clear that what is subjectively real, what's real from the point of view of our experience and our mind, is only this present moment. If you have a memory of the past, the object in your mind is still held in the present moment. It's based on causes that arose in the past. Likewise, if you speculate about the future, you're doing that in the present moment. It's only this present moment is the only moment we really experience. So it can be useful if you're doing Vipassana meditation and the mind is wandering into various thoughts and daydreams. It can be useful to categorize those as thoughts of the past and the future, and to understand and see the difference. In one of Buddhadasa's writings, he's talking about mindfulness of breathing, and he makes a practical distinction between thoughts of the past and the future that seems to be a very useful one. If you're trying to do the samatha meditation and focus on the breath, and the mind wanders into thoughts of the past, memories and reveries of the past, it's a different tenor to it than if the mind wanders into speculations about the future, fears or hopes or daydreams about what wonderful things you're going to accomplish. If the mind wanders into the past, he says there's still some samadhi present there, because the past is really a fixed thing. There's a story that has been laid down, and you're looking at it. So the mind hasn't gone as far astray, and you should be very gentle with it and not break the concentration, but just shift it back to the proper object. The samadhi's not broken when you wander into the past. It's just gone off the proper object. But it's different if you wander into the future, thoughts about the future, because the future is not fixed and there's many options and the speculation can be endless. That concentration is gone, the samadhi is gone, and you need to be a bit more forceful in bringing it back and re-establishing it strongly at the point of contact. I think as a general rule that works. It is possible, I think that even if the mind goes into the past, you can lose the focus if you start running in alternate scenarios. What if I had taken that train? What would have happened? How my life would have been different? Then you're running into into speculation, right? So it works the same way as the thought about the future. But if you're running memories of things that actually happened, then there's still some concentration there. You just have to bring it back to the proper object. There is in later Abhidhamma texts a concept called Kasana or a kana, a unit of time, the smallest unit of time. This is an idea that's actually paralleled again to something in modern understanding. There's a quantum limit to how small a unit of length or a unit of time can be. So it isn't really an infinitesimal. There's a discrete unit as small as that you can possibly go. Kasana is a single mind moment. The tendency from modern Burmese writers, Abhidhamma writers, is to define it very small, try and make it in the very many millions of them in a second. I think that they're consciously trying to bring it in line with smallest time units in physics. But in the Abhidharma Kosha, there is a passage that talks about different units of time as multiples of each other, and starting at a day and working backwards down to a kasana, you can calculate the length of a kasana according to that text as being 50 milliseconds. That is 20 to a second. So a one mind moment in that definition is there's 20 to a second. Which in one sense that seems very long, but in another sense, a practical sense, is quite short. You imagine if you're doing Vipassana meditation perfectly, you should be noting 20 discrete objects a second, if this measurement is correct. Personally, I suspect it's correct or close to correct. It's not a definitive proof, but many years ago I did a kind of a rough experiment. I set up an electronic circuit with a variable frequency, a light that blinked on and off at a variable frequency that I can control with a knob. And I put myself in a meditative state and I turned the knob until I could first start to see it blink. And then I could read the frequency off and I knew what was the time scale at which I could perceive a discrete event. And a number of trials, it ended up being somewhere between 50 and 100 milliseconds. So I suspect there might be something to that. That would be something worth doing more rigorously. I was just kind of fooling around, but that would be an experiment that could be done more rigorously with different test subjects and with a more finely controlled apparatus to see when you could detect the blinking. Whatever the exact number is, there's certainly many mind moments in a second. It's very quick. The mind is very quick processing objects. And this is why we experience reality as a kind of a smooth gradation, because it's so quick. It's like the old way they did films with so many frames per second flashing by, still pictures. And now it's all digital, it's a different deal, but in the the old days with movie projectors with a roll of film that was just a series of still pictures that were flashed by the camera or the projector, flashed by the projectors so many a second. And the mind perceives it as smooth action. Now, this is basically how the mind works at the level of mind moments. We're taking a discrete object in each moment and construct an experience of smooth action, of gradual change. The other end of the time scale is going up from kasanas to go to various intermediate stages to something like an hour, which was 48 minutes, and so many of those in a day, and then so many days in a month, in a year. And at the top end of the scale are kappas, the age of an entire world. The longest time unit that I've come across in the text is again from Abhidharmakosha, Sarvastivadin text, is Asankaya kappa, by their definition, is 10 to the 57th power kappas. And it's said to be the length of time it takes from taking a bodhisattva vow to becoming a Buddha. So all the way from a Kasana to a Asankaya kappa. And a kappa is never defined in terms of number of years. It cannot easily be defined in number of years or thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years, but it can be expressed by a simile. Imagine if there were a block of granite, a yojana on a side, and a sparrow flew by once every 100 years and brushed it lightly with its tail feathers. That block of granite would be worn to nothing before the end of the kappa. So that's how long a kappa is. There is a difference in conceptions of time in Indian and Western culture, and this is, Indian culture, including Buddhists, but also all the other Hindus, Jains, and so on. There is in those cultures there is a sense of time being cyclical, whereas in the West, including Persia, everything Persia and westward, Persia, Middle East, Europe, there's a sense of time being linear. The medieval view in Europe of the history of the world was God created the world on a certain day around 4000 BC, and it will end on a certain day around 2000 AD, so that there's like 6 millennia to equivalent to the 6 days of creation. So it's a very short time frame compared to either the Indian or to the modern geological time frames for the Earth. And it has a direction. There's a story to it. There's a creation, a fall, a redemption, final crisis, and final salvation, and kingdom of heaven. So it's a story with a beginning, middle, climax, and an end. Right? That's the Christian version, but there's similar things in Islam and Zoroastrianism, and even in Western paganism, like the Norse gods with Ragnarok. So this is always this idea of beginning, middle, and end, a linear direction to time. Whereas in India, the sense of time was always cyclical, that there isn't any kind of point to history. There isn't a beginning and a progress to some end and a final crisis. It's just more of the same over and over again, endlessly. Long cycles of time. In the Buddhist version, in Buddhist cosmology, the idea of a kappa has a number of divisions within it, and human life cycles between an idyllic golden age and gradual decline down to a really miserable dark age, and then ascension back to a golden age. And according to one version, this happens 20 times in the cycle of one world system. And the world systems come and go in their own cycles. There's no ultimate beginning and no ultimate end. And this is the underlying idea of samsara, which means the wandering around. That comes from the verb sansareti, to wander in circles. The idea is it's ultimately futile. There's no purpose or direction to it. It's just you're going up, you're going down. You go up to the very top and you come tumbling down. And this is played out at the level of individuals in the cycles of birth and death and rebirth. That in the long cycle of samsara, beings go through all different kind of forms and humans and animals, devas, hell beings, ghosts, Brahma gods. You're up and down, and there's no within samsara. There's no resolution. The idea is to get out of the game altogether. This sense of going up and down pointlessly is it's reflected in to some degree in the game of Snakes and Ladders, which is a popular children's game that the English imported from India. The Indian version was explicitly meant to signify birth and rebirth, that you take a higher birth and a lower birth. I've seen an Indian version of the game that had the different sort of classes of beings, and you go rise and fall up and down these different places. One of the kind of cultural effects of different concepts of time is that ancient India, although they were very advanced in some intellectual pursuits, in mathematics, they were the leading edge of the world for a long time, and they were quite advanced in astronomy and medicine. The one thing they never developed was historiography or chronology. They never kept a good account of their own records, so that all ancient Indian dates in history is vague and uncertain. We don't even know the dates of the Buddha, really. There's different theories about it. Nothing can be pinned down exactly. The first sure date we have in Indian history, when we can start to get things more firm, is when Alexander the Great invaded, and we have dates from Greek sources, and then we can work backwards and forwards from that. But ancient Indians didn't care about that. I mean, so kings had battles and conquered empires. It's just all more of the same, up and down. It's not really seen as important as a linear history. Wasn't seen as a linear movement. So when we situate ourselves in the big view of time, in the samsaric time, that's the purpose of it is to encourage disenchantment and dispassion towards continued existence, to allow the mind to move towards liberation. There's a series of suttas in the Sutta Nikaya. Like most of that collection, they're short suttas where the Buddha, using various analogies, very powerful sort of images of saying, monks, do you see these Himalaya mountains? Can you imagine if all the skulls you've left behind in your previous lifetimes were piled up? They would be taller than the Himalaya mountains. This should be enough. You should say enough. It's alang, and it's just like put as one sentence, alang, enough. So it's like quite emphasized, enough. This should be enough to arouse dispassion, disenchantment, and a desire for liberation. Enough filling up of the cemeteries. Make done with filling up the cemeteries. And that kind of refrain is at the end of each of these suttas. There's like, I don't know, 6 or 8 of them with these different analogies. The blood you shed by being beheaded as a criminal or as an ox or a goat could fill the great oceans. The mother's milk you've drank is greater than the great oceans. The tears you've shed is greater than the great oceans. So there's a sense of vastness of all this, and and what has it all got you, right? It's like, it's all endless rearrangement of forms. So the Buddha wanted to encourage us to situate ourselves in that long view of time, to help break the attachment to present existence. Right? We tend to always see our own situation, our own struggles and problems and accomplishments and disasters and so on as very important. But in the big scheme of things, they're nothing. We're just a flicker like a firefly. Human life is short. There's a story, really beautiful story in Dhammapada commentary about some gods, devas, playing in the garden, and one of the female deities dies, which for them is just like poof, they're gone. Right? There's no death agony. They just cease to exist, and then they're reborn somewhere else. And she's reborn human, but she retains her memory of being a deva. She was born mindful. She retained her memory of being a deva. And all she wanted to do was get back to the deva realm. So she spent her whole life doing good deeds and making merit and being very holy, pious type person, and always with her mind aspiration, may I be reborn in Tawatingsa heaven. And she lives to be over 100, been married, and she had multiple children and grandchildren, and had a busy life. Over 100, she dies, and poof, she's back in the garden. And to the devas, it's only been like maybe an hour or 2 has passed. Says, oh, where were you? We haven't seen you about for a bit. She says, oh, I died. You died? Yeah, I died. I was reborn human, and I lived 100 years and died from that and came back here. And the Dewa prince who's talking to her, he says, 100 years, so brief, such a flicker. This is all the humans have, and yet they waste it. He's shocked, at the idea. It's one of the contemplations that I'm encouraged to do often is the days and nights are relentlessly passing. How well am I spending my time? Think of the sands in the hourglass running out. The movement of time really is, for what's important, the subjective experience. It's extremely variable subjectively. Years and years ago, after I did a long retreat, someone asked me after, what was your experience of the passage of time? And I thought about it, and I said that, well, the individual hours sometimes seem to go on forever, but the months flew by. The weeks and the months flew by. And it's often, how we, not just on retreat, but it's often how we experience time. And subjectively, it's so variable. So what it comes down to is metaphysical speculation about time is maybe fun to play with, but it's not ultimately going to get you anywhere. You can't come up with any definitive answers. But the subjective experience of time, we need to have that really, I think, on those 2 levels. We need to have the broad picture in the background, realize that it goes beyond this life, right? And that not only have you existed many times in the past, but what you're going to experience in the future is determined by what you do now. Thinking about rebirth, one of the most useful contemplations is to not to worry about the past, which nothing can be done about, but to think of this life as what am I contributing in this life to any possible future life? What kind of seeds am I planting? And this should be in the background, but what in the foreground needs to be a strong grounding in the present moment. Present moment reality is all that is really present. The only thing that we really have is this one moment, present moment. And there's some things about being firmly present in the present moment that are advantageous. Is the self only exists with reference to past and future. Purely being in the present moment, there's no room for a self. Self is either defined in terms of past, like if someone asks you, who are you in a social situation, you're likely to give a bit of your history, where you've worked and what you've done, and this is your this defines yourself, right? Your history. Or you project it into the future, imagining what you hope to accomplish or what you fear might happen. And there's a projection into the future. But in the present moment, there's just experience. There's just this present moment. There's the mind and an object. That's all there is. So there's no room for a self. And whatever arises that's pleasant in the mind, if it's appreciated in the present moment, it's just perfectly pleasant. There's no sense of impending loss. Then it's a more pleasant experience. But also likewise with unpleasant or painful experience, if it's taken just in the present moment, it's not overwhelming. We can bear anything for a moment. What makes painful situations difficult and seemingly unbearable is the mind's tendency to project forward and think, oh, this is going to go on and on and on, and then you fall into despair. But if it's just taken at the present moment, this is what's happening now at this moment, and the most painful experiences can be borne. There's nothing you can't bear for a single moment. So I think I'll wind it up. That's a few reflections on the nature of time.